Okay, folks, good evening and welcome to the Marshfield School Committee meeting on January 5th, 2021. Happy 2021, everybody. It is no longer 2020. Great to see everybody's faces. Mrs. Pazerski, if you could please call the roll.
Mr. Costello?
Here.
Mr. Greer?
Here.
Mrs. Brady? Here. Ms. Campbell? Ms. Boyd? Here.
Beautiful. If you could all please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, folks, as most of you know, we have a packed agenda tonight, only a few items, but a ton of information in all of those items. We're going to start the meeting with our informational section. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over now to Superintendent Granatino. Go ahead, Mr. Granatino.
Thank you, Mr. Costello. I have one item on my superintendent's report, and it's simply just to have one more chance to comment about the decision that was made Sunday night to move the district into a remote model for the next 2 weeks. I just want to read a few thoughts from that. As you are all aware, the district moved to remote learning per my communication that went out on Sunday evening. While the timing of the decision was not optimal for any of our stakeholders, students, parents, or staff, it was one made with the best interests of our school community in mind. As has been shared with you, even with 18 positive COVID cases among our school community members during the first part of winter break, we were planning to return to school in our hybrid model on January 4th. We got word late on Sunday that there were another additional 14 cases between New Year's and Sunday in our school community. After seeing this dramatic spike in a short period of time, and knowing that we had dozens and dozens of students and staff already out either in quarantine or in isolation, we went in the direction of moving to our remote model of learning. I fully recognize the challenge that the late notice caused, and if this information could have been shared with you earlier, we most certainly would have done so. But regardless of the timing of the announcement, the fact that the town of Marshfield has had dramatic increases in the number of COVID cases, that we had many students and staff unable to attend school, and that the spike was expected to increase even more over the next few days and weeks, was reason for us to move in this direction. Our nurse director, the town's nurse for the Board of Health, our chair of the Board of Health, the district's physician, and representatives from DESE were in agreement that this was the most prudent action to take. No one wants our students to miss class time. In fact, as a district, we are looking at ways to bring our students back in a safe fashion. Nonetheless, the numbers were too serious to ignore, and we, like many districts around the Commonwealth, and even right next door, made the decision to move to remote to start the new year. I've shared additional information with the district in the update that was sent home yesterday, and the dedicated educators in our entire leadership team have been working nonstop to make sure the remote model works effectively for your children. There may be bumps here and there with the implementation around the district, but I've heard many reports from parents thanking the staff for their efforts and citing many examples of exemplary remote instruction. We will all continue to improve on this front over the next week and a half, and we'll work to address any questions or concerns as they arise. I also understand the concern that felt by many of our student athletes who have had their winter seasons go on pause for 2 weeks. Please know the goal will be to continue their season when we return, and there will be plenty of opportunities to make up games that have been canceled. We are not alone. There are a number of teams in our league that have had to quarantine some of their winter teams, and one other district in the league just went fully remote as well. Many teams across the state had to quarantine and miss time in the fall, but they all had the ability to make up games and finish their seasons. That will be our goal as well. To add even more current information, we have now had 8 new cases of COVID-19 among staff and students over the past 2 days. That means since Christmas Eve, we've had 40 cases. In addition, as of last Thursday, the town had 800 cases of COVID-19, had 800 cases of COVID-19. As of today's COVID-19 conference call this morning with our town leaders, it was noted by the Board of Health that this number now stands at 868. So that's 68 new cases in the past 5 days. As we move forward, I urge all of our stakeholders to continually do all they can to combat this virus. Wearing masks, social distancing, constant washing of hands, and avoiding large groups are all critical in this battle. So when we do return, we will be able to do so and remain in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granatino. And if I could just say before moving on to Dr. Martin's update, Mr. Granatino, I have to say publicly, thank you for your swift action on Sunday. I know that was a stressful day as you got that news rather late and made that decision, like I said, in a swift fashion, and did so with the health and safety of our students, staff, and their parents and families at the forefront of your mind. So thank you for that, Mr. Granatino. That's the kind of leadership we appreciate having from you here in Marshfield. Dr. Martin.
I do have an agenda item. So just a couple of things, because we haven't met since December. So just our alternative remote students at Furnace Brook, the day before the holiday break, all 3 grade levels got together with the administrators at Furnace Brook and their homeroom teachers and just had so much fun. Mr. Granatino was on it. I jumped on, they played Kahoot. They did all kinds of activities just to kind of build some of their excitement for the break, but also just to keep that social emotional connection with them. And then our alternative remote students at the elementary, so our remote students, had a kind of a drive-by parade. And I don't know who was more excited, if it was the students or the staff who finally got to see their students face to face. They were really excited, and that was just such a great time for everybody, and everybody was just in such high spirits. So just a couple of highlights from before the break. And then I know Ms. Campbell and a few of our administrators just got off of a Zoom session facilitated by 3 of our school psychologists at the elementary level, Liz Brannon, Elisa Posner, and Mike Fish. They did a session on how to be successful during remote learning for our elementary parents. There were over 60 people that hopped on this Zoom call, and they just offered some really great tips and were able to actually open it up to a conversation for the last 20 minutes or so, just to hear from parents, answer questions. Parents were sharing ideas with one another. It was a really great hour of interaction with the parents. So we are going to put those slides with the links on our website so that people who couldn't make it have access to that material and that information. So very big thank you to the 3 of them for facilitating that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. Much appreciated. Mrs. Scalaro.
I just have 2 quick updates. The first is about the Department of Education's tiered focus monitoring visit that is scheduled for the district on January 27th. During that day, I will meet with a representative from the Department of Ed. Superintendent Granatino will meet with a representative, and our CPAC leadership will also meet with a representative. Prior to that meeting, the Department of Education will be sending a survey directly to the families of all students with special needs in the district in order to gather some feedback from families prior to the visit. My office is going to send out a press release this week, just letting the public know that this visit is happening. So I will be able to give you more update about that at the January 19th meeting, but just so that you know that's coming. And then my second update is just briefly during this period while the district is remote, how that impacts students with special needs and students in our high needs populations. So as the Department of Ed has been very clear since the very beginning that students in preschool, students with significant and complex needs, and students in our high needs populations must be prioritized for in-person learning, even if the rest of the district is learning remotely. So these are our students with the most significant learning needs. So to that end, we are working very diligently to make sure that we are able to bring students back into the buildings if possible. Today, the first day, Monday, everyone was remote because we just did not have the time to evaluate exactly if we would be able to run the programs safely. Our students who attend our 5-day programs across the district return to school today. And tomorrow, the principals at the elementary level, they're going to evaluate the buildings, evaluate the staffing levels, and make determinations about if we can begin to bring some of our students back who attend our 4-day programs. So for the next 2 weeks at the middle school and the high school, all decisions in special education are made on an individual basis, but overall, students at the middle school and the high school who typically attend school 4 days will remain remote, just because of logistics and staffing, and can we do it meaningfully, can we do it safely? So they will remain remote for the next 2 weeks. And then from there, all decisions about whether or not individual programs can run are really going to be made at the building level, because it's going to have to do with staffing levels at the building. And, it's very possible that one program in a building may have to close temporarily while others stay open. It's really going to be made individually by the principals, according to the circumstances of the school. The one last thing is on the students who attend our 4-day programs. Many of our students in our 5-day programs are advanced to school, but many of the students in our 4-day programs do take the school bus, and where we do not have our school buses running right now, we're working with families for either families to help provide the transportation, or if that's an issue, they can contact the building principal. That is my update.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Scalaro. Much appreciated. Mr. Miller.
I think I have three things on the agenda, three things on the agenda. So with everything going on, we'll stick to those topics. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Don't worry, folks. It will be a Tom Miller heavy meeting. Give the people what they want. Any subcommittee reports at this time? Okay, seeing none, I would just like to, before we head into our usual business, I want to just include in the subcommittee reports, not so much a subcommittee, but just a quick thank you to a partner that we've been lucky to work with here on the school committee for the past 6 years. Selectman Chairman Michael Bradley announced yesterday that he is not running for re-election, and would just like to thank Michael for his service to the town. He's been a great partner for the school, somebody who's always prioritized what the schools need. He's always a phone call away, and more importantly than that, he's a father of 3 Marshfield students. So we thank Mike for his 6 years of service to the town, and we wish him the very best as he moves on from his 2 terms on the Board of Selectmen. So thank you, Michael Bradley. We are going to skip over, I don't suppose we have our student representatives here, do we?
Do not believe so.
Don't believe so, okay. We've now entered a portion of the meeting for public participation, and would just like to remind folks about a couple things of public participation. Yes, Mrs. Markles, I see you. Here's how we are going to do public participation as we have done in the past when we've had a lot of people on our Zoom meetings. I'm going to ask that if you would like to speak in public comment, now is the time to do so. Type your name and only your name in the chat, and I will call on people as they are typed in. My friend here, Lara the Hammer Brait, will be doing the timekeeping. Everybody will get 90 seconds if they sign up for public comment, 90 seconds to speak. And Ms. Brait, who does have administrative rights on the Zoom, will cut in and mute you if you go too much over your time, just because we have a schedule to stick to and a lot of important things to hear from, but we do want to hear from folks. So if you would like to speak in public comment, please type your name in the chat. As usual, we do not allow people to respond from the committee or from the administration directly to public comment. So it just like folks to know that if you do make a public comment and you have questions that you've asked, those will not be directly responded to as you ask them. But we would like to hear from folks. So first person I have here is the one and only Cindy Good. So Cindy, I am going to unmute you now. Just going to find you on this list here. And once I unmute you, Cindy, and you start talking, you've got 90 seconds. Oops, I think I just unmuted the wrong person. Good start, Sean. There we go, Cindy.
Thank you so much for hearing me. I am a social studies teacher at the high school. I've been there for 20 years, and I noticed that there are going to be some changes that the state is mandating for us. And so I just wanted to speak to that because as an educator, I know that the first rule of thumb is consistency and routine are really important for kids. And so I'm apprehensive to change anything because I know the ultimate goal is to get everybody back in full time. And so that would mean an additional change. And so I am reluctant to have any changes, but I guess I'm just apprehensive at the thought of having to have children simultaneously live and, Zooming in or Google Meeting in, because I don't want to take any time away from the kids who are in front of me. I don't want to divide my attention. I believe that 84 minutes, they deserve my whole attention. And, my other concern is, you build a vibe in a classroom with kids, and then I introduce other students into it, and now you have to rebuild your vibe. So it kind of puts you back to square one, which is always a challenge, but we do what we can. And then my last question is, there are some rumblings and rumors, and we haven't really been consulted all that much about this alleviating the need for asynchronous work. And I guess I just need some answers on how that would alleviate asynchronous work, because I'm not really seeing that when I'm thinking it through. So I just wanted to come and express my concerns. I don't want the kids to be upheaved at all. I think that they've kind of been upended enough this year. And I just wanted to come and speak on behalf of my students because I care about them and they are my first and top priority at all times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. We appreciate it. There you go. She muted herself. She's an expert on Zoom as a Marshfield teacher. Cindy, thank you very much. We appreciate that. We appreciate, and I'll keep saying it to the teachers that come on tonight, we appreciate all the sacrifices you've made to adjust to these unprecedented times. Going to unmute now Kate Tracy, teacher at MHS and former school committee member. Kate, welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I sent a letter to all the school committee members. I don't know if you guys received it sorry, I know it was a long letter, so, but I know what it's like to be in your position, and I know how important it is to hear from all the stakeholders before you make a decision. So, and again, I'm speaking not, just as a teacher at MHS on behalf of the students, but also as a parent of 2 students myself. So first, just going real quick, I'm not going to read over the whole letter. It's pretty long, but I just, the waiver request, I know DESE is making us do this, but I do know that their waiver request has some circumstances that if you meet, you can get a waiver from the state. And I feel that the surveys that Dr. Martin took in November could be applied, or even an additional survey could go out to try to alleviate the pressure of this. And I'm just curious where we stand on that waiver. I saw a letter went out by Dr. Martin and Mr. Granatino on, I think it was December 12th, and I didn't see any data associated with that. So I didn't know if that was the actual waiver request. The second thing I wanted to talk about was students. Obviously, like Ms. Good said, the students are first and foremost. And when I asked them, I said, I really feel that your voices should be heard. And I'm so happy to see so many of them. I hope they do speak up tonight, especially the seniors who have lost so much. These kids have lost so much normalcy. And if there's anything we can bring back, or keeping something, as Ms. Good said, consistent for them, that is very important. And I did survey my own students in class using Poll Everywhere, and 62% of them picked option 3. Which is the one with the 32-minute Zoom on Wednesdays and 10 during the remote days. And then number 3 is the teacher input. Again, 46% of us at the high school approved of option 3, which was the receiving the majority of the votes on that. And as Ms. Good said, it's very, very hard to, and as I can see some of you, like you're in a room, you're trying to answer the questions with the people in the room with you, and at the same time, address the issues that are, the technological issues that you have in front of you. So having, as Ms. Good said, the rapport that we have built has been great. I love working with the students I have in front of me, and I would hate to lose that. And I would lose that. And they're going to feel so self-conscious with others listening in on them. So again, as a teacher, I have to say, we really got to consider to consider the students here. So I appreciate you listening to all the stakeholders in this and really hear what they have to say before making any of your final decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Very much appreciated. Next up, I am going to unmute, and I think this is a first that we've had in a while. We have a student at MHS who would like to speak in public comment, Allison Kerr.
Hi, I am a MHS senior, and I totally agree with Miss Good and Miss Tracy. I think their points were very well put out and well said. I totally agree with the fact that we do need, as students, and especially for me as a senior, the structure that we have right now is pretty great. I mean, I'm working pretty well. I'm keeping up with all of my things that I have to do. I also have a job during the day. So, I mean, it is kind of tough to see that I would be having changes within my everyday routine that I've already set up and kind of focused all of everything else that I do during my days around this routine that we have already set up. That's about all I would like to say. And thank you so much for hearing me and listening to me.
Great, Allison. I want to thank you. We never get students come on here to speak to us. I know that takes a lot of guts, especially with over 100 people in the meeting. So that says something about you, says something about your teachers, and that they prepared you to do that. So congratulations and thank you very much for your input. We very much appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
I am going now to, I don't know if the folks on the committee are familiar with this young lady. Her name is Sarah Marples. So I am going to unmute you, Mrs. Marples.
Unmuted yet. Okay. I will try to get this in 90 seconds. I
Mrs. Marples, as the head of the union, I'm going to give you a leeway on
95, right?
You can have 30 more seconds.
I was going to say 3 more seconds. 93.
And you won't get much eye contact because I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I get everything in.
You do what you got to do, Sarah.
Chairperson Costello, Mr. Greer, Ms. Stetson Campbell, Ms. Brait, Ms. Boyd, Superintendent Granatino, Dr. Martin, Mr. Miller, and all those attending this meeting. My name is Sarah Marples, and I'm here as president of the Marshfield Education Association, representing the teachers, educational support professionals, assistant principals, clerical support professionals, and tutors who are dedicated to helping the students of Marshfield grow and learn. Given that we have had to return to a fully remote teaching and learning model, it might seem ironic to be addressing the possible return to fully live in-school learning, but we all understand that it will take planning and a lot of work to determine if we can make that happen safely. The educational, social, emotional, and physical toll on everyone since March 13th, 2020 has been incalculable. Despite these challenges, we have worked together to help our students succeed. But I don't think there is anyone who does not wish to go back to normal. Being back in our classrooms safely with our students is the ideal situation. The key factor is safely. Safe for our students, safe for our staff and our faculty, safe for our families. This recent reversal to fully remote, despite all the precautions we have taken, demonstrates how difficult this will be to achieve. Our schools are not in a vacuum separate from the outside community. Each day we are informed about a growing number of cases and the transmutation and variations of this insidious virus. This must be a major consideration as we plan to move forward. We cannot isolate our students or ourselves from the world outside of our schools. We can control our school environment to some extent, but we must remember it is not just our classrooms, but our hallways, gymnasiums, lunchrooms, restrooms, buses, et cetera. All staff, from the highest administrator to the person driving the school bus, have been assiduous in following the guidelines during these past 4 months. Despite that, we have had a growing number of COVID positive or exposures, and that is only with half our students in our schools on any given day. A safe learning environment is not just providing a 6-foot safe zone for the teachers, which is ephemeral. Teaching and learning is not a stagnant activity, but requires a certain amount of closeness and interaction, especially at our elementary school level or with our students who face various challenges. The logistics of moving from one classroom or learning space to another will need a general to plan and many soldiers to supervise. Safely serving student lunches is challenging at a number of levels, especially timing and location. Anywhere outside of the cafeterias add safety, supervision, and sanitation components. Transporting students to and from school will stretch our resources, whether it is safe buses or parents dropping students off. Giving our custodial staff the personnel and time needed to continually sanitize the school spaces in addition to their regular responsibilities is another concern. Providing additional nursing staff and the space for them to work with students, as they will need to deal with a doubling of their daily contact with students and a geometric growth in contact tracing and notification. Finding staff to fill in when a teacher or ESP or tutor or assistant principal and on when people have to isolate or quarantine is already a real problem. We must be prepared to see that this will become more difficult to do. When you move staff around or have them fill in the holes, you increase the danger of exposing people to infection, compounding the problem. Replacing staff who cannot continue to work and come in and work live for a variety of legitimate reasons will happen unless we provide a safe, fully live learning environment. I want to reiterate, we all want to be fully live safely. The association will work with the administration to try to find a way to make this happen. But as you look at what is possible, remember, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, unless you can do it safely. I know we are all concerned about that, but I just wanted to make sure that our parents, and I know our school committee already understands this, but it's not just about 6 feet versus 3 feet. And I appreciate and thank you for your time. Have a good evening and Happy New Year. I apologize. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Marples. Mrs. Pazurski, if the minutes could please reflect that I was very nice to Mrs. Marples and did not cut her off. And Mr. Greer didn't say anything, at least with his microphone on. The final person who has put in the chat, this is just the last call for anybody to put their name in the chat if they would like to speak in public participation. I'm going to unmute Shannon Grenham. Shannon, that request is coming your way now.
Hi, my name is Shannon Grenham, and I'm a senior at the high school.
I love it. Awesome.
I have a list from a group of seniors who just wanted to get some points across from a student point of view. First of all, we wanted to thank you for everything you've been doing for us. This has been a crazy year. We wish that there was more student input with the big decisions, especially from a high school perspective. We all understand our workloads and our schedules, and finding out that there were these options that could change our entire year once we just got used to it kind of stressed us all out, and we wish we had more of an opportunity to discuss it. Another thing is that, well, just to say it again, we all just got adjusted, and now we'd have to relearn an entire new schedule and an entire new system. What Ms. Good said earlier about the teachers not being able to give students full attention, that is something that all of us really need this year and really need the connection with our teachers. So to have teachers having to deal with us in person and online, it just might be too much for all of us. And I think we all have a lot of stress on our plates already. And just lastly, on a different note, not really the schedules, the seniors are asking that the school committee and administration and the community just gives us the same love and appreciation that the senior class got last year. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Shannon, thank you very much. And this is awesome that we've had two students speak so eloquently during public comment. And I think I can, break the rules just a little bit right now and say that we will absolutely celebrate our seniors at the very best of our ability this year too. You guys truly deserve it. So thank you for being brave enough to come and share that with us on behalf of yourself and your classmates. Last person I'm calling on here is Ellie McLaughlin, and Ellie and I are in middle of an intense game of phone tag right now. So Ellie, I apologize that I missed your call back this afternoon, but I'm going to unmute you now. I just lost your name. There it is.
Hey guys, yes, Sean, phone tag. Thanks to the other members that I've been able to connect with this week and talk over a couple of things. Actually, the only thing I have to say, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but I really just want to take a moment. I don't want to complain. I don't want to bitch. I don't want to say anything negative. I want to give a shout out to the nurses who I think are really the unsung heroes in the last couple of weeks, particularly with all the, I was fortunate enough to receive a contact tracing call myself last night. And I got to tell you, the work that they're doing, I really hope it doesn't go unnoticed. I'm not taking anything away from the educators when I say that the nurses really are the front line and they're going above and beyond trying to keep our community safe. And I really don't think enough is said about them and enough praise is given to them during this really difficult time. So those are the only comments I'm going to make. I know Jeff's doing a sigh of relief over there because he's happy I'm not going to say anything else. And that's it.
Ellie, thank you very much. Could not agree with you more. Thank you very much, folks. We appreciate that public comment and do appreciate seeing the shout outs to our seniors in the chat as well. I would advise everybody who had comments and who has questions to remain with us here because we are going to move right in. We're just going to shift things on the agenda a little bit. Mr. Miller, I apologize. We're going to move the operating budget to the end and we're going to start with the structured learning time revisions. I know Mr. Granatino and Dr. Martin have a presentation on that. Hopefully we'll answer some questions that you may have and shed some more light on the situation. So Mr. Granatino and Dr. Martin, I will turn it on over to you. After that point, I will turn it back to the committee for any questions that the members of the committee may have. And then we will do the same exact thing with the plans for in-person instruction. So go ahead, Mr. Granatino and Dr. Martin, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Just for a little introduction, Dr. Martin of the district leadership team and the Teaching and Learning Task Force have been busy since late November, working on ways to revise and revamp our current hybrid model of learning. Much of their work has been driven by the input that we receive from our students, parents, and staff, whether it was through our family and staff forums or survey responses. Dr. Martin teamed with educators at all levels, school committee members, Mr. Costello, Ms. Boyd, Ms. Stetson Campbell, parents from around the district, and a high school senior, had as their goal to make the appropriate recommendations to adjust our current hybrid model while staying focused on what's best for students, staff, and families. In addition, as many of you know, DESE, our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, took action in mid-December to establish for the first time a set number of hours to be dedicated to direct or live instruction over a 2-week period for those districts utilizing hybrid or remote learning models. This action obviously impacted the work of the task force, and in concert with the feedback of our stakeholders, gave the task force plenty of information and data from which to make the best recommendations for our district under these unique circumstances. Dr. Martin is now going to walk us briefly through some of the work of the task force, along with presenting some of the recommendations for the committee to consider. Thank you. Turn it over to Dr. Martin. Uh-oh. Let me see if I can for you.
Just trying to pull up the presentation, unless you want to pull it up.
I only have the PDF of it. I don't have the, you kind of pull the PDF?
You can pull up either way. It doesn't matter. Just trying to pull it. I was trying to pull it up on Google, but
Hold on a second.
I don't think I'm I'm not a co-host yet.
How about if I try to share my screen? That's not. Yeah, that's, I put it up there, but that's the PDF. It won't let me switch.
That's
page.
okay. That'll work.
It won't let me switch pages though.
Can you just scroll down?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
If any
we go.
if any teachers need any sort of instructions on how to do things with technology during these next 2 weeks of remote learning, just give Jeff a call.
Yeah, we're just an old school PowerPoint, but.
All right. We'll jump right in. So as Mr. Granatino said, the Teaching and Learning Task Force started meeting late November, early December. So I'm just going to go through a few slides that talk about our goal, slides that have the members and the representation, a quick process slide, and then the recommendations that both task forces came up with. So our Teaching and Learning Task Force goal was really to make feasible recommendations for adjustments to our hybrid model. Of course, staying focused on what's best for students, staff, and families. We have all kinds of stakeholders to consider in these decisions. So the next two slides, as you can see, we had pretty large task force groups. We had administrators, teachers, digital learning folks like Amy and Dave. We had school committee members, parents. Sally Marples, the MEA president, was part of this. We did have a student who brought some of the, I guess, her colleagues' viewpoints to our meetings as well. And then Mr. Miller also sat in on both task force groups. So that's 6 to 12. Pre-K to 5 was a makeup pretty similar to that. We also had a specialist at elementary, Mr. Larson, who jumped on board to give the viewpoint of the specialist as well. So the process really, we started meeting, as I said, right after the forums and the surveys, because we wanted to make some adjustments to begin with. So we started even prior to meeting, all of the committee reps had the data, access to all of the data, the survey data, all of that. We were doing some kind of sharing on documents before we met the first time. And then after we started meeting, we really were working on some documents of options and using almost a process that we would use in negotiations, whether things are feasible, acceptable, and beneficial. So we looked at the structure. So are we keeping an A-B schedule? Are we keeping Wednesdays, in-person return? Are we adjusting our model, or are we just doing some changes in practice? Those were all things that we had started talking about. And then, of course, the Board of Ed and the Department of Ed came out with the regulation changes. So we really had to shift our focus on ways to achieve their structured learning time. And so the next slide just really talks about, these are kind of the outline of their emergency regulations. I did sit in on the Zoom meeting for much of the discussion, and it was not an overwhelming vote. It was 7-4 vote. But in the end, we still have to adhere by the regulations. So it's a minimum 35 hours of live instruction over a 10-day school period. This only pertains to our hybrid model because the hybrid model is our main model for the district. So when they talk about live instruction, it's really a combination of in-person and then the live synchronous or the remote synchronous instruction. So we rely heavily on asynchronous, which is screencasts and videos and interactive activities with our students. So live instruction to them is really the synchronous learning that's directed by a teacher. This is their definition. It happens in real time with other students. So this could take place of live whole class instruction. It could take place as live small group work. Some could be live online. It could be live streamed. It could be small group instruction. And they were clear that optional check-ins, such as our office hours that we have right now, do not count for that 35-hour requirement. One thing that they also mentioned is that the hours could be averaged across the grades. So pre-K and kindergarten do not count in this 35-hour requirement. So as long as we have an average of 35 hours over that 10 days between grades 1 and 12, that will make us meet that requirement of that 35 hours. So there's also has to be an opportunity for students to interact with educators every day. So now above and beyond that 35 hours, it could be that daily live check-in. So such as what some people are doing at the elementary. So on Wednesdays, those live check-ins also count. Just a quick note too, that the implementation, we need to have this in place by January 19th. However, we also know that that week is the last week of the semester, so that a lot of changes would be coming down the pike at once. So we want to keep that in mind as we move forward. But we are expected to submit our new schedules early in February to the Department of Ed. So those, one thing I will mention is the waiver request. We did talk a lot at the task force meetings about the waiver request. There were 5 ways that you could request a waiver, and really the bottom line is we really could not apply for those 5 ways. There was, we had to prove student engagement in synchronous and asynchronous instruction. Now, although we could run reports and things for people who showed up, we can't, there's really no way, and they would not give us a way of how to show a high level of student engagement. One was an alternative education program, which we did not apply for, and then operational constraints, where all of the other districts are making this work. That really was not an option as well. Synchronous methods reaching a meaningful number of students during asynchronous time. From what the numbers show, very few of our students were, or not enough of our students were taking advantage of that. And then family satisfaction, we have the survey results that did not show in many cases a high level of family satisfaction. One thing that the Department of Ed did say was, please do not assume a positive response to any waiver request, and that we needed to prepare for this requirement regardless. So, that's where the waiver request came in, and that is why those 5 ways that we could have gotten a waiver really did not apply to us. So we wanted to focus our attention on making the changes and putting all of our efforts into this process. So some of the considerations after the regulation changes for 6 to 12, really they're right here. Like, we needed to increase our synchronous time by 5 to 5.5 hours a week. We had to make sure we had that daily interaction. We looked at all kinds of options. We did look at, as somebody mentioned, a 10-minute, a 30-minute, a 42-minute, whether we do shorter times on Wednesdays, longer times on Wednesdays. And we really looked at the consistency for kids and the support for students, pacing of the cohorts. Right now, a lot of the cohorts are, one cohort is ahead of the other, not ahead of the other. So we wanted to consider if we could do something to help that with that pacing. We wanted to make sure we had student participation and attendance. And we also know that regardless, we still need collaboration time for our teachers to make any of this work. And they need professional development on now new kind of ways for synchronous learning to take place. So all of those considerations were taken into account. So our ultimate 6 to 12 recommendations, on the remote days, we would keep the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday cohorts. Students would participate in their classes either through Zoom or Google Meet for a minimum of 42 minutes. So that's half of the block period of 84. However, this is one thing that we need to keep in mind, that students don't have to have their cameras on or be on Zoom for that entire time. So teachers could provide some instruction. We have to keep in mind that this has to be instructional time. So they could provide instruction and then say to the students, you can go off to work on an assignment, and then give them some time to go work, as long as the teacher is available during that 42 minutes of time in case a student had a question or anything like that, that would still meet this requirement. So they could have them work on an assignment offline, bring them back together to go over it, answer questions, share with the other cohort, etc. So it's not that students would have to sit on a camera or a teacher would have to lecture for 42 minutes. That is not what we would want any teacher to have to do, is lecture for 42 minutes to two of their groups. And then on Wednesdays, during the remote Wednesday, students would meet in all of their 8 classes for 15 minutes each. That would be a time, that would be more of the check-in time. So teachers could go over an upcoming schedule, answer questions, wrap up something, do an activity, reteach, any of that. And then the teachers would still be able to have some PD and some collaboration time to make this model successful. So after all of that would be taken into consideration, the total average hours for 6 through 12 over a 10-day period would be a little over 39 hours. So we would surpass the 35-hour point just slightly. So those are the 6 to 12 recommendations. Questions, we know there are a lot of questions that are coming out. We just, before the break, we wanted to come out with kind of the skeleton model of what this will look like. All of these are questions that we know we're going to have to talk about, is the Wednesday PD. How are some classes who probably don't lend themselves to a Zoom in model, how can those classes have some flexibility? How are we going to support our students with IEPs or 504s or our high needs students? Best practice, what's the best technology? What are our attendance requirements at this point? Do cameras need to be on? All of this, and plus the communication about the changes in the expectations for families and students and staff. So all of these things we know we still have to address, but we did have to have some sort of skeleton to start building off of at this point. So that's the 6 to 12. We can move on to the pre-K to 5. So elementary, we already had some time built in, which now at this point, some of the check-ins will most likely move to more instructional time rather than a simple check-in or sharing. We would have to have increased our synchronous learning time by about 4 hours weekly. However, if the secondary group is over that 35 hours, elementary could actually be a little bit less than that 35 hours to come up with the average. We do have to continue the daily live interaction. Some options, we talked about, do we have them join in classes 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours on the remote days? Do we change the sessions on Wednesdays? Do we include specialists in the synchronous time, or do we leave them asynchronous? Again, a lot of this came back to the consistency for students. We talked about changing the model completely, doing the half day, doing all of that. However, as I think Mrs. Marples alluded to, and some of the other task force members will allude to, our ultimate goal is to get our kids back in person full time. So what in the meantime is going to be the least disruptive for schedules, for families who have planned for this? You know, we had parents on the committee who were struggling with trying to find childcare in the first place, and now what would happen if we had to completely upend the model? And then in the meantime, having to have that backup plan of shifting to remote as we're in right now. So all of these changes, what would be the least disruptive in the meantime as we plan for our kids to come back fully in person? So that was really, I think, the crux of our conversation at pre-K to 5. So our ultimate recommendations, we are keeping the current Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday cohort in place. Preschool and kindergarten, where these regulations did not apply to them, we want to keep them in place as they're doing, not make any changes. The current schedule of the school days stays in place, so 40 minutes of teacher planning prior to the students' arrival, and then the regular dismissal time. Wednesday, the synchronous time, we just want to make sure that we ensure that classroom teachers are providing 60 minutes and 30 minutes for specialists. That was probably what was happening in most cases, but we just want to make sure that that's across the board to meet this requirement. So the way that pre-K to 5 is a little bit more tricky because there aren't set times necessarily. There's not a block of time that everything kind of kids switch classes or switch places, or so it gets a little bit, we do need a little bit more flexibility at the elementary level. So what the thought is that the teachers would provide that synchronous teaching of their mini lessons. So we do readers and writers workshop where there is a mini lesson time period, and then there's time for students to work, and then there's a share period at the end. So this model would lend itself to that workshop model a little bit better. So they would be able to provide the mini lesson to all of their students at the same time, thus keeping both cohorts on the same pace as well. So students would zoom in, again, not for the entire time. It would most likely be the mini lesson that they would be zooming in for. The teacher provides that instruction. Students go off to practice. The teacher brings them back together and answers questions, share, those types of things. The other thing that we are recommending is that our specialists on the students' remote day, they would provide their synchronous classes. So the students would have one less asynchronous lesson from their specialist during the week in lieu of having kind of a live Zoom session. The one place that this gets even more tricky though, again, is a specialist like PE, and how would we have students really Zoom in there? So that's one of the questions that will be on the next page, is how are we going to really utilize the specialists? Because music and art could be similar in the way that they would kind of give some direction to students. Students would go off and create something and then come back, ask questions, share, and those types of things. So it also needs to be noted that, and this came up actually in the session that we just saw with the school psychologist, is that, you know, our grades 1 and 2 students probably cannot sit on Zoom as long as a grades 4 and 5 student. So there is going to be some piloting that will have to take place before the 19th, because we need to make sure that we're not overtaxing our youngest students who probably cannot attend for as long as a 5th grader can. So the average number of hours over the 10-day period though for pre-K to 5 would be 31 hours. So average that with the high school at 39 would be able to meet that 35-hour requirement as an average of over the 10-day period. So again, the next slide, just some questions that are coming up that we have to consider are, which workshop? Are we going to do reading? Are we going to do writing? Are we going to do math? All of them, one of them. Again, the Wednesday collaboration and PD time. We are not looking to change the Wednesday model. That would still be basically an early release day for students. And then teachers would have the rest of that day for collaboration and planning. And then how can we utilize other staff members? Is there a way to use other folks to help with the Zoom sessions, especially with our littlest kids? And then again, the IEPs, the 504s, the technology, all of these things need to be taken into consideration, and we need to explore how we can best do this. So those are really the recommendations from the two task force groups. We did split because there were so many differences between secondary and elementary. But those are the recommendations that they came forward with. And I hear everyone's points of view, and we did take all of those surveys and the forum data and the task force members who came from all of our stakeholder groups into consideration when we made these recommendations. So that's the opportunity, I guess, here to ask questions from the committee members and for clarification or other.
Sure. So I will recognize members of the committee to ask questions if they have them. Before we do that, I just very quickly want to say thank you to both of you for such an informational presentation. And thanks to those who participated in the task force. And special shout out, I saw she signed on during the presentation, Megan Hayes, a senior at MHS, who was a student representative on the task force and lent a lot of great advice and help on that. So Megan, shout out to you. Thank you for all of your help with that. And on that note too, to the students who had spoken in public comment and who had expressed a desire for their input to be heard, we love that. We want your input to be heard. That's why, and I commend Jeff and Ellen for having a student on that task force and making sure there was that voice. But folks, those of you who do want to be heard, sean.costello@mpsd.org. Students can always, I love hearing from students. There was genuine excitement when we saw that you wanted to speak during this. So if you have things that you'd like us to know about your experience, please send me an email, send the school committee an email, send the superintendent an email, send your principal an email. Let us know how it's going. That's what we want to hear. So that being said, I will turn it on over to the members of the committee to ask questions. I will start with Ms. Boyd, just kind of going down the list. Ms. Boyd, if you have questions, I will recognize you to ask or any questions or provide any comments.
Sure. Thank you. And yes, thank you to the members of the task force, both task forces with the elementary and the K-12. I know a lot of work was put into taking a look at the different models and the different options, keeping the students' interests at mind and at heart. I guess I have a couple of questions related to balance then of the asynchronous work. And I just sort of want to confirm, I guess, how I understand it, make sure I'm getting this correctly. So if we pursued the recommendation here then of the 42 minutes of the synchronous sort of concurrent teaching and I'm talking about the middle school and high school levels right now, this would eliminate the asynchronous learning. Is that right?
So what it would really eliminate most likely is the need for the teacher's screencasts and the screencasts and videos of actual lessons. Okay. So that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be additional work beyond that 42 minutes because we still have an 84-minute period. Do you know what I mean? So yep. That doesn't mean there wouldn't be additional work by any means, but that would probably alleviate some of those screencasts that the teachers would have to provide for students because they would be giving that instruction live.
Okay, and if we looked at the model which Ms. Tracy, I think, was speaking to with the 10-minute check-ins during the remote days and longer sort of days, check-ins on Wednesdays, I would assume, though, then that would would that sort of tip that balance again back toward more asynchronous and screencast lessons for teachers?
Yes, correct. It would have to, they would have to do the screencasts of the lessons throughout the week as well. One thing that really, and I think I said it earlier, that the 35 hours it really has to be instructional time, so that the 10-minute check-ins, although that would keep a schedule and that would keep some asynchronous learning going, even the 35 minutes, one back to back on a Wednesday, we didn't feel that was the best thing for students either, because they would be shifting gears so quickly between their classes. And especially if those would be instructional periods, if those 35 minutes back to back would be instruction, they would be getting 8 classes like in a row of instruction. So there were just, that was a really tough, I think we had a lot of conversation in the high school. Representatives really had a lot of conversation around that option. But the bottom line is it really has to be instructional time. And a 10-minute time period at the start of each class really doesn't provide a lot of opportunity for actual instruction to take place.
If you remember going back to our meetings in the fall, that was a big point of discussion from staff and from student and from parents when we talked about getting some live interaction in that 10-minute or 15-minute check-in was something that I think we all heard loud and clear as something that folks wanted to see. I think going into this process with the Teaching and Learning Task Force, those are the types of nuances that they were looking to bring to the hybrid model. And unfortunately, with the mandated recommendations from the state, the check-in time doesn't meet their criteria. And if you did the 10 minutes across the board of those schedules, we wouldn't be meeting those 35 hours either. So it's kind of a double whammy. And unfortunately, this is really, as it's pretty clear to see, a shift away from the asynchronous instruction, the work that was done by staff in building leaders throughout the summer and to get ready for the school year. And it's the one real big negative of this process, that we're moving away from something that was discussed quite a bit. There was a lot of folks that were for and against it, but to meet the needs here, these mandates from the state, we're kind of unfortunately forced into moving away from something that we had some strong beliefs on. And we let the commissioner know that in the note that we sent him back in December.
Thank you. Just one last question relative to the elementary model. Would the live sort of mini lessons that you were speaking to be held at a consistent time each day? I think, that's one thing that I think parents would appreciate, is just that a flexibility and a schedule, and knowing, exactly when that could happen at any given time during the day. So would that be sort of scheduled, knowing that elementary schools are different than the high school and middle school?
Yes, I think we'd want to make that as consistent as possible. I mean, we do have to work with our specialist schedules within there as well. And they're on a 3-week rotation right now instead of their typical that they've always been on. That might be a shift that we have to look at. But I think all teachers would want to have as much consistency there as possible. I think it's going to make everyone's life easier. So I would assume that we would do that as much as we possibly can. And I think during this 2-week remote period, we're finding that the more consistent the schedule, the better it is for everyone right now.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's all I can know.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boyd. I'm going to turn it on over now to Ms. Brait.
I can't see myself, so I don't know can you hear me? Everyone can hear me on this? Okay. So I have a few questions and a few comments. I heard you say full attention, that the students deserve the teachers' full attention. And I want to let you know that I 100% agree with that. I know that in doing what's best for teachers, students, and families, which was the beginning of your presentation, That sometimes looks different for everyone because all kids are different, all families are different, all teachers are different. They have different, different lifestyles, different learning styles, all that. With that being said, I believe that every student deserves a quality education. And even though their circumstances are different, our educators really need to try to accommodate all of these kids. I'm curious about what your plans are for teachers that might be feeling like they're not as up to date as they should be or could be on the technology piece. That's a huge piece of this and a huge piece of them being able to provide the best education for their students and might be a cause of stress in our buildings. So I'd like to know what your plans are to address that problem.
Yep. We've actually already started talking about how we are going to have to shift our PD. Amy McAlpine and I are meeting with the digital learning coaches actually tomorrow to kind of discuss some of these changes and what some of that shifting will have to look like. We are talking about doing some templates. Actually, Amy put together some draft templates that teachers might be able to use within Canvas to kind of make it a little bit more organized for students to be able to access their Zoom sessions and kind of have that schedule within Canvas. But this is going to be a shift. This is concurrent teaching. It's no longer what we have been doing all along. So, I mean, there are some great resources. Catlin Tucker, who we have used already, who we've referenced at the very beginning, has done a lot on concurrent teaching. And she is offering another course coming up as well that a few of us are going to attend. So I think it is going to be a shift for teachers, and we do have to support them, which is another reason why we want to keep those Wednesday times for collaboration and PD so well in place, because without that, it really will be much more difficult for them to be able to succeed at this, because it is a different way of teaching. It's a different way of doing things than we've planned for. So I think that Wednesday, that's another reason why we kind of stayed away from the 35-minute after 35-minute time on Wednesday, and we really wanted to keep that time sacred so that people could get up to speed on how to do this kind of teaching.
Okay, and I'm assuming that there'll be some sort of follow-up schedule, with the building principals and with your leadership team that will consistently check in with them to make sure that they are feeling supported and getting what they need to provide the proper education to these kids.
Yes, and we actually are meeting on Thursday with both leadership teams, 6 to 12 and pre-K to 5, to do some of this planning. But I think even that Wednesday, a lot of our principals are always around. They're checking constantly, but that's their time for staff meetings and things like that to do those check-ins and make sure that people are feeling comfortable and to gauge what kind of support that they need at that point.
Right. I know there's a lot going on those Wednesdays, so I was just curious as to how you were going to make changes. As far as the 9 through 12, I think you said, or it might be 6 through 12, forgive me, I didn't write it down right. But you said you didn't want teachers to have to do a live lesson for 42 minutes. Of course, right, talking for 42 minutes straight is hard, even for me. But, having them teach for 10 and then sit for the rest of the time is probably not ideal. I don't think it's ideal in the eyes of a lot of people. It's not ideal in my eyes. It's not ideal in the eyes of the parents that have, vocalized to you. So is there some sort of minimum time? And what are your plans to address this if these times aren't being met?
Well, that's part of our supervision and evaluation. I think we're even going through that right now of, making sure even during this remote time that we're meeting those thresholds that we're telling parents and we have in our schedule. So I think that is a supervision evaluation issue that we are always constantly kind of faced with. But I don't know if we've come up with a minimum time that you have to provide the actual lesson. I think it's going to depend on the actual lesson. So if you are introducing a unit it might be a longer introduction, and they might be having both the class in front of them and the class online at the same time doing that introduction. Whereas other lessons might be teaching something while the kids in class are working on something, and then shifting and then kind of having the kids online work on that activity and doing something with the kids in class. So I think there are multiple ways, and that's part of kind of our next few weeks of trying to pilot some of these options and ideas, trying to get ideas from other districts. We have some, but are there some best practice ideas that we can consider at this point as well?
I think it's best to look at it like, in a traditional classroom, we have fantastic teachers, and they're not speaking for 42 minutes and then sending the kids off to the other 42 at the high school or at the middle school. They might be speaking for 10 minutes, and then there's an assignment for a period of time, then they come back, and then there's more teaching going on. So, over the course of that session, we're looking at 42 minutes of instruction. But it could be chopped up into smaller segments. It doesn't have to be 42 straight, and I don't think anyone would typically do that, and we don't want to see that happen here either. But we want to see that extended period of 42 minutes throughout that class.
Right. Thank you for that. I'll be done in a minute. My next question or comment is that I keep hearing you guys talk about consistency, and I also agree that that's really important. I think since I started on the school committee, I've been talking about how, ways that we can collaborate with other schools. I mean, other schools in our district. So all of our elementaries, let's take the best practices and work together to find the best way. I would love to see the school day for these kids set up almost the same way across the board. In the morning is their math, and then they have a snack, and then they, in all these times, I just, I see a lot of inconsistencies in that, and I would love for it to look a little bit more consistent across the board.
Well, I think that comes in, there are so many things that go into scheduling. So we do have some buildings that share specialists. So that disrupts, that makes it impossible for all of the classes to have this similar schedule. There's also related service providers that have to schedule students. So when is the best time to schedule those students for services so that they're not missing things in class? So all of those kinds of behind the scenes scheduling, that actually is going to have to be, we're going to have to take a look at all of that now that we have this requirement. But I think that the main thing we want to look at is, because some teachers do teach ELA in the morning and some teach it in the afternoon. It kind of depends on their day and how they feel their students are learning best. Some students learn math better in the morning, but yet some schedules require it to be in the afternoon. So it just kind of depends. But I think the ultimate goal is to find one of these workshops or two of these workshops so that that's kind of the consistent piece, is that you're always going to be getting your writer's workshop live. So, and whenever that might be, that's going to be the thing that's live. So I think that's the kind of pieces that we're going to try and make the most consistent. I think our digital learning coaches are going to be huge in this. And also, even before this, we started talking at leadership about what are some look-fors, what's the checklist, what are some look-fors that all of us are going to make sure that we're kind of making sure that all the teachers have in their pocket. So those are things I think we started working on even before this, that we're just going to have to continue because that's our job as leaders, is to make sure that we are helping support the teachers to make sure they're helping support the students. So, we have our responsibility to do that.
And your thoughts about sharing the best practices, that's something that we've been encouraging throughout. The teachers do a great job and spend a lot of the time on Wednesdays currently, in the model that we have in place now, sharing ideas. And we encourage, if someone had a great lesson on, cells or whatever, they could share some of those asynchronous activities and asynchronous presentations. Now that this is more of a direct instructional process, they still have that time Wednesdays to collaborate with their peers, possibly talk across buildings, like you say, because what's going well at Ames Way could work over at Daniel Webster and vice versa. So I think that type of collaboration is something that we always encourage and want to see that happen. And I think the teachers, there's so many great teachers in this district. There's a lot of great ideas to share. So we're hoping to see that continue.
One more thing. I heard you say in your presentation that you wanted to make sure that you weren't over-tasking students. I also would like to hear you say that you wanted to make sure that you weren't under-tasking students
that's
as
true.
well as part of that.
Yep.
I think that it's, obviously but it's a balance, right? Because as I said
Absolutely.
in the beginning of when I started talking, that every family is different. And I think that in these, extraordinary times that we're all experiencing, just because something's different and new doesn't mean that it's not going to work. And if it's not working, we need to try something different. So I guess, I want to say thank you for your hard work. I know you guys are working way above and beyond your hours. Thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to seeing this be successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Braid. I'm going to go to Mr. Greer, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Campbell. So, Mr. Greer, you go ahead.
Can you hear me? All right. So, looking through the presentation, it seems to me like you broke it into two one-size-fits-all solutions, right? That are permanent. One being pre-K through 5, and the other being 6 through 12. I'm just curious if pre-K through 5 is truly all alike, or needs to be all alike, and 6 through 12 really needs to be all alike, or is 6th grade much different than 7th grade, which is much different than 8th, which may be different, totally different than high school. Have you looked at that? It's kind of some backstory. I know when you gave us the final result, I'm just kind of curious, did you think those things through?
We did. And I think it goes back to, this again, I think this goes back to, this is a bare bones kind of skeleton of our plan. We know that, and I think I alluded to it earlier, that first graders are not going to be able to be on Zoom as much as a 5th grader. So how can we meet the requirement of the average time without kind of putting our first graders at risk of being on Zoom too much? And as Mrs. Braid said, not having the other kids be on enough. So it's finding that balance. And I think over the next few weeks of trying things out, we might shift. We might end up having 6th graders be on less time and high schoolers be on more time, or vice versa. It might even come out vice versa. But I think we have to start somewhere. And this is the point that I think both groups felt that this was the best place to start. I think, as with anything, we make adjustments if something's not working. As Mrs. Braid just said, we have to start with a plan, and this is the plan to start with. And as we move forward, if something isn't working, or if we find a better way to do something, then we're going to address that and we will get on that. But we kind of have to try some things before we know exactly what works with this, because we haven't done this model before.
Okay, so the plan is that you will measure success somehow and make the appropriate adjustments moving forward? Okay. So I guess the next thing, not being an educator, I did teach for 1 year at Brockton High, but that doesn't qualify me to be an educator. But I'm just curious as to why are there multiple teaching methods? For example, you're teaching in a classroom, and what's the difference between that and just a computer in front of you and still teaching in a classroom and have, just say, cohort B at home logged on, doing the same stuff all the other kids are doing, right? And then at the end of the week, you switch. I don't understand why, like, everybody isn't always in the same class at the same time, whether they're remote or in person. And why remote learning would be done any differently than an in-person instruction. And I've seen this with I mean, at the college level, we'll throw that out, right? Because, you know, you may have to teach one class a day. That's totally different, right? But, you know, I've seen it with some of the Catholic schools, some of the other private schools where they have a mixture. You know, they have multiple cohorts. However, all of the students are in the class at the same time, whether they're remote or in person, right? So, you know, it's just, you have a computer or a camera, and that's, you know, you speak to that student, which maybe represent 12 or 14 different students, right? So could you explain why there's a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to the whole premise of our asynchronous model, I think, in the first place, and us looking at best practice, because, you know, even adults can only sit on, and someone had mentioned this, I think during the school psychologist presentation, that people can only sit on Zoom for so long before you can't attend anymore, and you're multitasking and you're not focusing. And I think a teacher it's very different when you're in front of a class of students and you're trying to interact with those students. It's very different than interacting with students on a computer screen. And then you cannot monitor. The other piece of this is you have to monitor what's happening on that computer screen to make sure that, A, it's appropriate, which most of our students, of course, are going to be appropriate, but also to make sure that there aren't any questions coming up there. Are there things going on? Is there something in the chat? Are there things coming up? But yet you have this group of students off in front of you, but yet you're trying to look at the computer screen, and it's very difficult to do both at the same time. And I don't know how effective that is. I mean, I know schools probably are doing it, as you said, but are they measuring the effectiveness and the student engagement? That's the big factor. Like, students can sit there, our teachers could sit there with the computer on, but are the students engaged in what they're doing? Are they actually learning? Are they actually listening and applying? Or are they just sitting passively for 84 minutes? So I think that's a big philosophical debate at the same time. But, you know, I think best practice shows and research shows that, you know, just zooming into a class is not as effective as that engagement piece of students. Plus, these students, someone mentioned it earlier, they are used to having a lot more individual attention right now because of the small cohort size, that now if you were to split that, not only with the kids in the whole class, but kids on the computer screen and in front of them, it's a big shift for students. And some students don't do well on Zoom. Some students are very anxious. So how do you provide some engaging opportunities for kids who might be so anxious that they don't want to be on Zoom, that they don't want to turn their camera on, there are so many kind of situations out here that our students and families have. Plus, what's the family situation? What's going on in the background? What are they at a childcare center that there's something that they can't be on for 84 minutes? Like, there's so many factors that are going into these decisions. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think there's just so much to think about when you decide whether a student should Zoom in for an entire class or half the class, and then go do some engaging activities outside of that time. So,
but to be clear, Mr. Greer, the cohorts will be, well, there's going to be half that are remote and half are in the class. They are going to be much more in the same trajectory. Right. It's more direct instruction, concurrent instruction than they've ever had. You know, what you were talking about with regards to, you know, the cohort B, you know, working asynchronously and not being on the same page as the kids in the other cohort. These folks will be moving together at the same pace, you know, so that's the big change in this model.
And I'm sorry to cut off there really quickly. I saw, since you hit on SEL quite a bit, Miss Boyd had unmuted herself, and I know this is one of her areas of expertise as well. So if she wants to jump in, I noticed you did that there, Bridget. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I'll just be quick. I appreciate all the concerns that you're raising, Ms. Martin. I feel like there are a number of school districts that have been operating, in this way for the past few months, and I'm hoping that we have some good connections and some good forums where we can talk to them about how they've handled some of those challenges. I'm sure there's a lot we can learn from them. So.
Agreed.
Mr. Greer, back to you, sir.
Yeah, so I guess the next question is, so we've presented this hybrid, or you've presented this hybrid model to us, and whether we stick with the scheduling, right, 2 on, 1 off, 2 on, but if we go to a full return, or we provide the option of full return, there's still going to be a number of students that by choice or otherwise will not be attending in person. So how are you going to deal with that?
Deal with that?
Right. Our alternative remote model isn't going anywhere. So that is still an option for students at any time. So they can put in a request to go fully remote at any time. We saw an influx at the elementary, so we did have to add staff. We have much more staff at the elementary than we had at the beginning. And middle and high school, again, they are using the Florida virtual. So, there is room for students to go remote at this point. We would never shut that down.
The commissioner hasn't steered away from ensuring that each district has a remote alternative. So we'd still use our remote. And that's one of the things that we'll be doing probably over the next 2 weeks, is to try to gauge a better understanding, a concrete understanding of how many people, may shift, whether we, move to this hybrid model or down the road, if we're going in person, we need to know how many people that might impact as far as wanting to move remote. So we will still have the remote option available, regardless of what model we have in place here.
All right. So one follow-up question to that. So based on what you said, I'm under the impression that the full remote students receive an education through a different source and at a different pace than the current hybrid students. Is that correct?
A different source.
Well, it's a two-part question, right?
Yeah.
So the next one, if you can't remember it all, I'll repeat it. But the next thing is, so if we do a full return and these kids are full remote, their education will be totally separate from what we're providing in person.
Yes and no. So the 6 through 12 alternative remote model is Florida Virtual Schools, but the way that they're trying to pace that out is trying to align it to what we teach here in Marshfield. So what our department heads and our coordinators did at the very beginning was they kind of put these modules in order, and they took out modules that wouldn't make sense, and they put them in order so that the teachers who are pushing out that content are pushing it out in a similar pace as to what our students here are getting. And I should also just mention that the Florida Virtual Schools is aligned to the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, which we also have to adhere to. So elementary, I think they're also getting the same curriculum because they don't have a different source. They don't have a different provider of the curriculum. Our teachers are actually teaching that in that model, in the K-5 alternate remote. So they're constantly, I actually meet with them, and they're constantly in communication with their colleagues back at the buildings as well. They share a lot of the same materials, and they have the same resources and all of that. So that the elementary would not be all that much different depending on whether they're remote or in person. We also have done some pacing charts where the elementary people, the elementary teachers in the remote program and also in the hybrid kind of paced out where they're at certain points of the year. So we are keeping an eye on that to make sure that they're getting a similar pacing and the similar content. Hopefully that answers your question.
So the very last thing, and it just has to do with the presentation. What I didn't see in there is milestones and an implementation schedule. So could you just provide that at some point?
Well, the schedule, I mean, we have to have the schedule in place by the 19th. So I think that's what the leadership team is meeting about on Thursday, is really what kind of schedule can we expect. The tricky part to the schedule piece, especially at the middle and high school, is that is the week that ends the semester. So how much are we going to put in place actually on the 19th versus having a plan for and shifting at the semester break, because you're shifting teachers, you're shifting schedules, you're shifting all of these things for kids. So how much can we possibly change all at once versus change, like how much change do we want kids to be cycling through within a week's period? So I think that is the purpose of meeting with the elementary and the leadership at the middle and high school this week, is to try and come up with kind of a timeline. Also a timeline of what can we pilot between now and then to make sure that it's working. What do we need to do with technology to make sure that we have the appropriate tools for our teachers? Which tools work the best? Like all of those things are still in that kind of questioning mode right now because this was thrown at us so quickly. I mean, the Board of Ed just met prior to vacation and made this change. So we have to take into account that we can only put so much in place right now before we have to start asking and cycling through these questions and trying things out. So I wish I had a better answer for that one. I wish I could say that on such and such a date, we're going to do this and then this and then this. I think we still have to make those plans.
Okay. You just keep me in the loop. I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Definitely.
That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greer. I'm going to go ahead and recognize Ms. Campbell. Go right ahead.
Can you hear her?
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my headphones are broken. I apologize. Thanks, Dr. Martin, and another thank you to everyone again that participated in the task force meetings. I know we were meeting at 7:30 a.m. It was an early meeting. Most of my questions have actually been answered, but I did want to kind of address a couple of comments that were made by my fellow committee members. And one, Mr. Greer, that there is no one size fits all. And I agree with you 100%. I think that's what makes this entire process that we've all been taking part in so challenging, is that there is no one size fits all. And adding more Zoom time for some kids might be great. And for other kids, it's going to make life more challenging. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I wish, and I was thinking about my experience as a classroom teacher when you were talking about looking at a screen and looking at students. And I wish that it would be that simple for our teachers, that they could just talk to the Zoom and talk to their classroom and it would be that easy. My time as an educator, if I was ever teaching my class sitting in front of a computer, I probably would have gotten fired. So I think we need to acknowledge that this is going to be a big shift for our teachers to be able to be teaching students in front of them, actively engaging them, and at the same time trying to keep an eye on, tiny little squares on a Zoom screen. We can't see if those kids are on their cell phones or they're playing games or they're, texting their friends or whatever. So it is a big shift. And I just wanted to acknowledge that for our teachers that are on, that we know this is going to be a big shift. I also wanted to address something that Ms. Brait talked about, the consistency and the best practices. That was something that was talked about on the elementary task force, because, sharing, I have a first grader, Dr. Martin has a first grader, another mom who was in that group has a first grader, and the differences and things that were happening in those classes we could see. So sharing best practices, yes, I think that's super important. In terms of the schedule, pre-COVID times in an elementary school, kids aren't doing things at the same time because of all the reasons that Dr. Martin mentioned. And so I just wanted to kind of share that point as well. The only other comment that I had, and Dr. Martin, you touched upon it a little bit, is consideration for the population of students that we have that you had mentioned that may not be comfortable on Zoom, may not have access to a private space in their home where there's not other people kind of running around, and what kind of accommodations can we make for those students that maybe, don't have the best technology, just different situations that might put kids at a disadvantage when you're talking about Zoom. I didn't see that anywhere in the PowerPoint presentation.
So I think, sorry, I'm like, have some background noise here. I think those are all things that we're going to have to consider. I think that comes into like even our high needs population. What is the best way for them to receive their education? But I think those are all things that we have to iron out, because it isn't one size fits all. Even though it looks like it is, it really isn't. That's not what education is. And that certainly isn't what Marshfield is all about, because we do believe that every student is different and everybody has a different need. So I think we have to come up with those. And also, this was mentioned, again, I keep going back to that school psychologist presentation, because they did mention about how caring and flexible our teachers are. And if there is a concern, if a parent has a concern about their student being on Zoom or being on Zoom too much or too little or not wanting to turn their camera on, the teachers have bent over backwards to make accommodations for these students, to make them feel comfortable and to help them out. So we can make some of those suggestions and some of those modifications, but I think our teachers just naturally do that as well. So even above and beyond kind of our regulations and our policies and our procedures, our teachers just are top notch at doing that. So we know there are considerations that need to be taken into account.
I would concur 100% in the sense that there's many teachers already in the short time that we've been in this remote model. I've seen teachers, some examples, and people have sent me information, if I didn't see it myself, related to how teachers are communicating with their students. And yes, there is a format, there's a model schedule that they're following, but they're offering the students a chance to, turn off the camera if they need to. And this is more at the elementary level, or, paste it out a little differently, and maybe not the exact model that is on the front page of the website, but that teacher felt comfortable, that teacher knew the needs of his students and was able to adjust the instruction to meet those children while still, making sure that he was addressing the entire class. So we are going to be providing a model, and I to your point, Kendra, the concerns that you were raising were the concerns that we talked about back in August and September when we were looking at going forward with asynchronous as opposed to this. But I'm confident that if we have the skeleton plan in place, in over time, our teachers are going to be able to fill that in with their talents, with their skill sets, with their understanding of their students in a way that's going to be not only meeting their academic needs, but meeting their social emotional needs as well. Because that's really one of the biggest things that we're losing when we move to any type of hybrid learning is away from full in-person learning. And it's a challenge, and under the best of circumstances, let alone now. But I am confident that our folks will be able to move forward in that model, but it may take a little time.
Yeah. And please don't think me addressing and saying that it's not just as simple as like Zooming on a computer in a classroom. That is in no way saying that our teachers are not capable of doing that. I have the utmost faith in all of our educators. I just wanted to say that it's not this like simple switch that people can do. But Dr. Martin, you brought up I have one more point that I wanted to make. And I've said this before at a school committee meeting, and I'm going to say it again based on the comment, Dr. Martin, about the last Zoom we were on, that a lot of times I have conversation with parents and they have concerns about things that are happening in the classroom. And when I say, have you talked to the teacher? Their answer is no. And so for any of the parents that are watching, I would encourage you. I know when I was an educator, if I didn't hear from parents, I assumed like everything's, candy canes and unicorns and rainbows and things are going great. So if you do have a concern or you have a question or you have an issue, to your point, Dr. Martin and Mr. Granatino, our teachers do want to hear, they want to listen, they want to support and make whatever, adaptations that they can make on behalf of our students, but they can't do that if they don't know what's going on. And, you know, my daughter's teachers are fantastic. And I think they're examples of every teacher in the district that they want to hear from parents on how their kids are doing and what they can do to support them. So I don't know, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell, and thank you to all the members for your questions, your comments, and your insight. Thank you as well to Mr. Granatino and Dr. Martin. I don't have really any questions to ask, but I do have something to say. And obviously, I just want to reiterate what you said, Mr. Granatino, that this is something that, a recommendation that you've been working on, Dr. Martin, prior to the state coming down with this ruling. In fact, I recall being in our task force meeting as you came back and said, hey, guess what the state just announced? And so that was just ironic that happened in middle of our task force meeting. So to the parents who have been raising these concerns, I want to make sure you know, rest assured that these folks have been going through this process prior to the state telling us to. You know, that being said, our hands are, as you've heard in the presentation, tied. The state has, you know, passed a ruling. And I'd like to say just a couple things, and this committee knows that I take my duty as the facilitator of these meetings very seriously, so I will just clarify that I'm saying these things on behalf of myself, not on behalf of the committee or the school district itself. But in times of great challenges, we look to our leaders to steady the ship. We rely on them for advice and for guidance and to help us minimize stress. We're one of nearly 300 school districts across the state of Massachusetts. We're very proud of the education we have here, and along with that, we're also part of something larger. We're part of public education in Massachusetts. From the very start of this pandemic, the Massachusetts Department of Education, in my view, has failed to provide this leadership. For March or April through the summer, our state officials knew the monumental challenges districts would face across Massachusetts. They kept everybody, as we all remember, in suspense. It was, okay, well, the recommendations are supposed to be coming down now, and then they pushed it back, and then they pushed it back again, and they pushed it back again. And then finally, when it came out, all it turned out to be these big recommendations that we were waiting for in the state is we're waiting to see what our education is going to look like is, okay, guys, you have to come up with 3 options. What your education is going to look like if you go back fully, what it's going to look like if you go back hybrid, and what it's going to go back if you go back in, what it's going to look like if you go back fully remote. The state told us at that point that we would have the ability, after submitting those 3 plans to the state for review, to vote as a local school district on which one to approve. I want to just reiterate there that the state placed a major burden that could potentially impact the health and safety of entire communities on people like the 5 of us who are, at the end of the day, volunteers. We certainly care very greatly for this community and for public education in it. We are volunteers who were put in a position to vote on something that could impact people's health. After the fact, the state continued to change their minds to cover their tracks. Districts that, and this is a conversation that we had recently, districts that had chosen fully remote, we're hearing are being audited by the same state who approved their plans and then told them to choose for themselves. So the state caves and starts to change their minds on that after the fact, after giving districts the ability to make that decision for themselves. And now, as we're seeing halfway through the year, as staff and students across the state adapt to new models of learning, and as we see here, our teachers and our students are certainly adjusting to the one that we've bought into, as you said, Mr. Granatino and Dr. Martin. As staff and students across the state adapt to these changes, the state once again tries to cover their tracks with these new standards on instruction time. As you said, Dr. Martin, they were announced right before the holidays, and we have to implement them 2 weeks after coming back to school. Because of their indecision and their inability to make tough choices in a timely fashion, it's caused confusion for students and families across the state and caused incredible undue and unfair stress on our teachers. And I felt that somebody needed to lend that frustration a voice, because it's been very frustrating for the last almost 9 months now. Aside from that, it's caused even more work for all of you folks and all of the teachers and staff here in Marshfield during a time where we are entering a fully remote model for the next 2 weeks. With the last thing you need right now is to focus on adjustments and to have educators have this on their plates. So plainly put, if the state thought these new requirements were necessary, they should have told us that in August. They had the time, and what they lacked was the leadership. They failed to stop the confusion caused by the pandemic and have allowed the blame for their oversight to be placed on our teachers and on our leadership here in Marshfield, which is unacceptable, and I won't let that happen. On the handling of the pandemic, at least when it comes to the education, in my view, the governor and his administration have failed students and staff in Marshfield and across the state. And I don't typically say things like that in meetings like this, but at this point, I'm at my breaking point. I've spoken to some other members of this committee who are just as frustrated. And again,
Wow, this has never happened.
I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not on behalf of the district, on behalf of anybody else here, but just wanted to make sure that my thoughts on the matter were crystal clear. So thank you for allowing me to get on my soapbox there as we move into the next portion of the agenda. So the next portion of the agenda is our plans for in-person instruction. And I believe this is you, Mr. Granatino, and Mr. Miller. Oh, I'm sorry, we just...
No, it's, well, I'll introduce Mr. Miller, but I just going back to the recommendations here. I just want to get a feel for the committee if they're, comfortable. I mean, some districts.
Oh, I apologize.
That's okay. No, we had some discussion about this because there are some districts that are voting as a school committee to, support any recommendations that come forward. Some are not taking an official vote on it, but it's just getting informed, and then the school department enacts it. So I'm up for either one. So
I will turn to the committee on this and just ask these folks. My inclination is to allow this information, since it's a lot of information, to sit, and if we are going to vote on it, to schedule a meeting, just a special quick meeting sometime next week to vote, if that is indeed the decision. I would like to just, and I know you've been asking around to some other districts,
Yeah.
but that's on me, Mr. Granatino. I didn't ask you to clarify that until this afternoon. So maybe we can check with DESE and see what other districts are doing, and if it's something that they're looking for a vote on.
Well, I did check. I mean, there's no mandate that it has to be a vote. I think some districts have chosen to take a vote as a committee, and some have left it up to the discretion just to, take in the information and recommend that the school department, school leaders move forward with those recommendations. So,
sure. Well, as I said, yes, Mr. Greer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'm under the mindset, lead, follow, get out of the way, right? So we're here to lead. So let's, I suggest we do that, even if it's a meaningless vote. I suggest that we take the lead on that. However, to your point, quite a bit of information. Everybody needs to digest it. So have a meeting in the not too distant future, and at least the 5 of us get together and kind of formalize what we're going to do.
I agree with you, Mr. Greer. If the rest of the members of the committee are comfortable with that, we can take a look at the calendar for the next week and schedule the time to vote. Again, we do want to let this sit with folks so they have time to reach out to us with any questions.
I would just ask, Mr. Chair, if we when you're looking at the calendars, the earlier the better. In the sense that I know there's been some talk about
we know you've got to
Monday
get this in
like
place
that,
by the 19th. Yep.
Because we want to just make sure that we're giving our folks time, and we're gonna go forward just like the state had said. If someone was putting in a waiver, you still have to go forward with planning for it. I think we will go forward with the planning that we have to do in the preparation. And if there's a change that comes out of any future vote, that's fine. We'll roll with that. But I think we have the footprint in place here as far as what we want to follow, the plan, and we'll work towards it. And if there's any tweaks to that, when we get together after you folks have a chance to ask any other final questions or make any changes, then we'll adapt there.
Great. Thank you. That works for me.
And I'm fine either way. So
good with the committee. I appreciate that. Okay. So we'll move on from this and then we'll revisit this and we'll communicate with the rest of the committee. And now
Right.
we will turn it on over to yourself and Mr. Miller. Thank you.
Okay, while we had all this going on with the Teaching and Learning Task Force, we also had the Facilities Task Force that was brought together in the summer to help look at how we could open up the school year under these circumstances. Now we're looking, as we've had from the get-go, that the goal to eventually get our students back into full in-person instruction, and back around the same time as these new changes from DESE, the governor was also opining about making sure that districts are doing what they can to at least look at what would make it feasible to open schools again to full in-person instruction. So it was kind of incumbent upon us, and that's why we brought back the Facilities Committee to take a look at what we have currently and what it would take for our students and staff to come back for full in-person instruction. So this group, led by Mr. Miller, with, again, parents, staff members, Mr. Greer, Ms. Brait from the committee, have been on it. And again, their main goal, as Tom will tell you, is to maximize in-school learning time for all students, with the ultimate goal of returning all students back to in-school full-time instruction. So that's been what's been their driving force, and they've spent multiple days working on a variety of different plans and looking at options and trying to gauge what's feasible and what's safe in our buildings and what it would take to get students back for in-person instruction. So I will turn it over now to Mr. Miller, and he'll walk us through their PowerPoint.
Getting close to my bedtime, so so what we're going to look at here is basically the goal of our task force, the numbers, the process we went through, and then the solutions that we developed at the 3 levels, elementary, middle school, and high school, as well as our last minute recommendations. Again, as Mr. Rankin stated, task force goal to maximize.
All right. I'm going to back it up a little bit. I was on mute. And I did say that it's approaching my bedtime, so that's why I wasn't unmuted. All right. Rewind. Start again. The agenda. We're going to look at our task force goal. The membership of the task force. The process we went through. The solutions at all 3 levels, elementary, middle school, and high school, as well as lastly, our recommendations that the group came up with. As Mr. Granatino stated, our goal was simply to maximize in-school learning time for all students, with the ultimate goal of returning all students back to in-school full-time. That is a simple task and a simple goal that we set out to achieve. Our membership can't thank Ms. Brait and Mr. Greer enough for what they have done with this group. Mr. Granatino said I was leading this group. Ms. Brait and Mr. Greer were steering the ship. I was just kind of driving, so they were navigating, and can't thank them enough. The rest of the membership, from all our buildings, all aspects of the district. Each with different levels of expertise. I want to note that we did have 3 parent members of the force, of the task force. Ms. Green, Ms. McDonough, and Ms. Steinberger were representing the parents. Of course, we had a number of other parents on there as well that are currently employees of the district as well, and staff members. So a great group. We met several times throughout the process. And here was our process. Thanks to Mr. Greer, the engineer in the group. He had us define our problems, brainstorm, and then develop solutions. We developed 3 problem statements, three problem statements / questions. Simply, number 1, how do we get all students back into school? Number 2, how do we feed all students? How do we run our lunch cycles at all our buildings? And then how do we get students to school? How do we transport students? So those were our 3. We brainstormed and came up with solutions. So we're going to start with the elementary level. how do we get students back in school at the elementary school, at our 5 elementary schools? We developed a classroom analysis, and let's see if this actually comes up. Actually, I have it right. Is this going to work, or do I have to go into the screen share? Is it still showing the, it's still showing the spreadsheet? Okay, is it right here? Am I now on the? Yep, okay, that's me. This is the first time doing Google Slides and presenting, so we're kind of, you know, this is the first time through. So I'm actually going to take you to, let's see. Yeah, see, I'm going to open with, this was what I was afraid of. So I'm just going to open with Google Sheets. And now let me know if this comes up. Are we in Google Sheets? Yes, we are. All right. All right, so Martinson, grade 4 is going to be our, I'm going to just show you really quickly what we're dealing with at our elementary level. The majority of our classrooms, as you can see at Martinson, the majority of our classrooms, when we combine our cohorts, so for example, just at the kindergarten level, cohort A has 9 students, cohort B, 4 students, a total of 13. Manageable with maximum desks at 6 feet, that last column. If we scroll down and take a look at grade 4, we do have a few classrooms, grade levels at the elementary level that would potentially exceed the maximum desks for their grade level and for their classrooms. Grade 4, Martinson, smallest rooms in the school, and relatively large class sizes comparatively across the board. So in this example, if we were to return both cohorts, the maximum without remote students, and I'm going to talk about that momentarily, would be 21, as you can see in the highlighted cell. So what we have here is an example of where we would have to move things around in the buildings. In this example, grade 4 would actually move their physical classroom. So the teachers would move to another classroom and would have to switch with other teachers. Obviously, something that, you know, would take a bit of work, but it is feasible and manageable. But also there would be 21 students here, which would be above the 20 maximum at the targeted of 6 feet. So that's where we get into the question of potential additional staffing, additional classrooms, or we look at, you know, the negative side effects of physically moving those students, a portion of those, the number of those students to another classroom, another teacher mid-year, for the sole reason of maintaining that target of 6 feet. So discussions to be had, and well, that's one of the things that we're going to have to look at as we move forward. As you can see, there's a whole bunch. This was all done for every building. Looking at the maximum desks for each building, there were 4 or 5 classrooms that would have to potentially have some movement, either adding a classroom or moving classrooms and looking at those things. The big thing, going back to the presentation, the big thing here is we need a definitive remote in-school decision from all families. So I know our principals, our buildings have reached out to all our remote families. This was pre-break, holiday break, so things may have changed a little bit since then with everything that's happened over the past couple weeks. But at that time, reaching out to those families, there were a handful, 7 or 8 families at Ames Way and 6 families at South River that said they were going to return from remote. I think some of those South River families have already returned as of yesterday. But then there were no students at Martinson, Daniel Webster, Governor Winslow that said they were returning from the alternative remote program. So as we approach January 22nd, which is our mid-year, beginning of our second semester, we have to have definitive decisions from those families, as well as we'd like to know if any, throughout the year, hybrid families have had the option to join that alternative remote. So that's also something we would like to have knowledge of as we make these plans. Going through the experience of the transportation issues on the buses, it's really difficult to get a solid definitive survey or even a complete commitment. So we're going to have to come up with a plan as a district to get those responses as soon as we can over the next week or two as we approach January 22nd, because that's when all these decisions need to be made. Also as part of the committee, so it was made feasible that we could do a target of 6 feet spacing with those few classrooms that potentially would have to be changed up. But then also as a part of this, sort of as a phase-in for elementary students. Again, we processed all this before the complete remote. Just I'll say that, that's gonna I'll say that for the end, but that's something to think about too as we were meeting as a committee. Very similar to the teaching and learning, getting that last minute DSE. We've had this major spike and going fully remote over the past week or so. So as a phase-in at the elementary level, at least initially, the half-day Wednesdays would remain a remote day with remote instruction through a time to be determined. So as we approached the date of bringing our elementary students back, it was very possible that our middle school students and our high school students would also be fully remote on Wednesdays, as they are now. So we felt it appropriate to remain fully remote at the elementary level on those Wednesdays, and eventually get back to a full half-day model, because those Wednesdays would be half-day for the remainder of the year. Moving forward, how do we feed all students? How do we provide lunch? The elementaries have done a great job. All 5 buildings have done a great job of utilizing classroom space and cafeteria space, all at 6 feet distance. We would continue to do that. South River had just recently, right before the break, brought their students all back into the cafeteria, which was great. Unfortunately, with all the students, if all the students were to return, we would have to break that up and still continue to use the classrooms and cafeteria. At Martin Center, it would be necessary to add additional seating in the cafeteria. That would be one action item that we would have. But other than that, we would be able to accomplish lunches, K-5. Lastly, how do we transport students? There was a full transportation analysis. I'll just shoot it up on the screen real quick as I talk this through. Here's our full return to busing at the elementary level. I'm not going to scroll through it, but you can see a number of the cohorts. We've been very fortunate that our parents many of our parents at the elementary level have provided transportation for their students. It was a lengthy process in September getting to this point, but in the end, I think we've finally solidified it, and it's been going well. Bringing the cohorts together would present some challenges. As you can see, going through. Yep. As going through these totals, we would have to have the ability to add and adjust routes. So I've met with Topman, Martha Topman, and Topman Industries, our transportation provider, several times, and by adjusting some routes, adding some routes, we've determined that we would be able to provide transportation fully for all students that are currently riding our buses. We did initially look at possibly doing 2 tiers, 2 different start times by cohort for each building. But in talking with our building principals, they preferred 1 start end time with a longer pickup drop off time frame. So in this solution, we revert back to our quote unquote regular start times, 8:20 to 3 o'clock for our early elementaries and 8:50 to 3:30 for our late elementaries. I'm going to talk about Furnace Brook in a second, but if Furnace Brook was to return, they would most likely go to a 2-tier system, and that would in turn bump our elementaries start back by about a half an hour. So that would be a possibility. But all in all, the great news was that the transportation would be feasible, and it would take a little bit of work, obviously, but we would be able to accomplish it. Moving forward to the middle school at Furnace Brook, we also did we started to put together a full classroom analysis at the middle school. And this is really at about 1,000-foot level. There's a lot of intricacies in the schedule. It's a lot different than the elementary model. Here, this was just the breakdown by cohort. Mr. Madden, Scott Madden, assistant principal, we really looked at grade 6 to start. We did look at all 3 levels. They're further down the spreadsheet. Grade 6 here, we looked at cohorts, class totals. This is basically the quote unquote first block that the Furnace Brook model has. And you can see there's some classes that are 26, some classes are 17, some are 14, 18. There's the maximum desks at 6 feet. So what we attempted to do is look at that and by cluster, and then it gets broken down into this rather convoluted spreadsheet here. All our class sizes with the staff, with the teachers, and how many students are in each of those blocks for that teacher for that classroom. Again, this is 1,000 feet. The real scheduling piece is done in Aspen, and the good discussion with Ms. Kemet today. They've already begun the work on rescheduling for the second semester. So that's the key date is January 22nd, actually January 25th, that Monday, would be the start date of the second semester. The Furnace Brook schedules would need to be adjusted and completed for that date. So what the real action item here, the real key important action item is to reschedule to balance those class sizes across the clusters, because no matter what we do as we move forward, those class sizes, if they're balanced, it's going to make it much easier to fit those classes under those maximum, the targeted guidelines. So for those classrooms. So obviously the real difficult rescheduling work hasn't been completed yet. It's been started, but just on an initial look on that through the spreadsheet and through the numbers, it would appear grade 6 and grade 7 are feasible. Can't say that 100%, but it does look like the possibility does exist that grade 6 and grade 7 could return at that targeted 6 feet. So there's still some work to be done there. Grade 6 is about 260 students. Grade 7 is about 270 students. Grade 8 is 340 students. Grade 8 has the smallest classroom sizes, physical, actual classrooms. Grade 8 is going to take some work, but we are looking at that as well. So that's obviously a little bit of work to be done there, but Furnace Brook has jumped on this and expect some results very shortly. And also along that same front, how do we provide lunches? The lunchtime at Furnace Brook, we need to complete that rescheduling, look at the timing of the blocks of the schedule, and really get to the thorough analysis. It needs to be worked on, but our lunches are not going to be the determining factor. At the 6 feet, it's a question mark, but we're committed to making it work. Lastly, at middle school, how do we transport? Again, that transportation analysis, the middle school, if we scroll to, all right, it's cranking. At the middle school level, all right. You see here combining the cohorts. It's feasible at a number of these, but obviously we have some buses that would be well over our 25 limit. Because of this, and because Furnace Brook does take all our buses that Topman can provide, there's really no way of adding additional buses. So right now, the solution to provide transportation would be to implement a two-tier busing system, a two-tier drop-off pickup. Simplest way was by the current cohort model. So in that solution, the school hours would be shortened a bit, 7:50 to 1:50, 8:20 to 2:20, and it would create a shorter day, and then obviously there would be a 30-minute lag that at the building we would work to alter blocks and make that work. So there's still some work to be done there, but again, it's feasible. Lastly, though, the DSE did say they did say there was going to be guidance before holiday break. The guidance promised future changes in transportation when it was feasible. So right now, as most people know, that we're 3 feet with a mask on the buses, which is 1 student per seat. So it's tough to speculate what future changes there would be, but that's also a possibility coming from the state. As Mr. Costello stated, that's one of the issues is we get word that something's coming out and then it gets pushed back. So that could change this system, but with a two-tier system, we can get our students to school. That moves us to the high school. The high schools, we have 15 desk maximum for almost every classroom in the new building. Outside of the science labs can handle more students at the target of 6 feet. With that 15 desk max, our majority of our classes, there is a spreadsheet that Mr. Kuthar provided, but I'm not going to pull that up. I didn't put it in PowerPoint. But the vast majority of the classes at the high school combined cohorts are greater than 20. So while looking at this, so within the state guidelines, which state guidelines 3 feet, 6 feet is the target, 3 feet is the state guideline. We would be able to bring students back to school and still maintain a 6 feet distance for our teaching staff. So again, this date is to be determined because that's the 3 feet, 6 feet student challenge that we have right now. So this is a little bit of a holding pattern for the high school. with the lunches, so something we looked at, if it did come to the fact that we were able to bring those students back under that target of 6 feet and make it work in the building, and the 6 feet distance for lunch remained, which is a distinct possibility that may stay for the remainder of the year. Talking with Mr. Kuther and the high school administration, we could potentially adjust to an earlier dismissal. If we were to bring back the middle school and their dismissal was 150 for their first dismissal, that would mean the high school dismissal would be 120. And once we got to that point, it would seem to be it makes much more sense to dismiss students a little bit earlier, provide them lunch if they so choose to take home at dismissal, and move that dismissal time back from 120 to an earlier time. There's still some work on the block scheduling there. I could foresee a 7:15 to 12:30-ish, somewhere in that time frame. But then the students would be able to go home, concentrate on academics, and lunch could be taken home, and we would be able to eliminate the issue of the 6 feet at lunch, because right now the 6 feet at lunch would be a difficult process at Marshfield High School. Transportation is not an issue. We only run 13 buses at the high school. Many are very low ridership. So that's not an issue. With everybody presently riding in the hybrid model, we could definitely transport students. So that brings us to our recommendations. Our group had really focused in on timelines. Obviously, as I stated before, with the movement to fully remote, we kind of backed off a tiny bit of the timelines on our recommendation. However, the recommendation at the elementary level would be to return all grades at the 6 feet distance, the target, full time, initially 4 days per week with a remote half day Wednesday, through a time to be determined. And what we originally, as it states here, to make changes in instructional time required by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, that's a reference to the January 19th date, because one thing we talked about in our group was minimizing the transition for students and staff. At some point, obviously our goal is to bring back students, get them back in the classroom K-5 as soon as we can. And that January 19th date would eliminate all the issues that Dr. Martin discussed with this type of learning with students in the classroom and online in front of our staff. So it's something that we were really focused on for January 19th. Now that we're fully remote, it's a little bit of a more difficult equation, but that's where we're at as far as the elementary level goes. The middle school, what we recommended was returning grades 6 to 8 in a phased-in approach. We know that grade 6, grade 7 have a significantly less enrollment, and it appears it's feasible that we could bring those students back in at the target of 6 feet. So we either way, we have operating within the state guidelines. Again, the 3 feet state guideline, maintaining 6 feet distance for teachers, and it's pending the completion of action items. We did discuss all those action items, getting the rescheduling done, and really looking at how we would provide lunches, the two key issues at the middle school. So working with the administration over there, we're going to accomplish those goals and look to return our students as soon as we can. So that's where we stand at the middle school. At the high school, pretty much repetitive of the slide. Previously, we hope to return all students within the state guidelines of 3 feet while maintaining a 6 feet distance for teachers. So that's how that gets accomplished. The lunches and the busing follows. Again, date to be determined, because that's where we are in this process. All that being said, again, our task force goal was to maximize in-school learning time for all students with the ultimate goal of returning all students back to in-school full-time. That was our stated goal. We try to keep a lot of the other stuff going on out of that discussion. And lastly, this is my own personal slide. I added this in. The quote, Henry Ford, obstacles are those frightful things you see when you take your eyes off your goal. So we really zeroed in on the goal. There's a lot of stuff that all this talk obviously brings up that is frightful, for lack of a better term. And, we went through this process in the summer. Hybrid seemed very difficult, challenging, lack of a better term, frightful. Bringing back our students full-time, same process. The ultimate goal, and I think everybody agrees that the ultimate goal, I know Ms. Marples has stated this numerous times, the ultimate goal is to get our students back in school. And so that is the ultimate goal. And, we have obstacles, no doubt about it, but we're committed to making it work when we can make it work. So with that, I'll wrap up, and I'm sure there's many questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Miller, for that thorough presentation. We'll turn it once again over to the committee, and I'm just pulling up the grid view here so I can actually see people. I am just going to assume that everybody has questions or comments on the committee, and I might as well go in reverse order that we did the last time. So go ahead, Kendra.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I fixed my earplug problem. Thank you, Tom, and everyone that was involved also in that task force. That couldn't have been easy trying to do all of the math and the numbers and all of that calculating. So thank you guys for the time and effort put in there. I just have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure, Tom, if this is a question for you or for someone else, but when you were speaking about the remote families and having to have kind of a decisive answer from them in terms of, when we do decide to go back full time and having them kind of decide what they're going to do, what do we as a district kind of have to continue to offer? And I don't know if that's changed, but if families say like, yes, I want to go back full time, are they committing to a certain length of time? Are they still allowed to move back to remote? What does that look like?
I mean, I'll let Dr. Martin and Mr. Granatino jump in, but just initially, we can thank our friends at the state once again for really not providing a whole lot of guidance on this. So what we stated at the beginning of the year for our remote students was that they were in that alternative remote to January 22nd. So that was our first block, and we hired a number of staff to staff that remote model through January 22nd. It's obvious at this point we need to remake that remote model is going to remain for the remainder of the year. So our staffing is going to stay, and those students will stay in a remote model unless something changes drastically, which I don't think anybody can foresee that happening. The issue is students that are in school can opt to remote at any time. Students that are in the remote model essentially can opt into in-school learning at any time. Now, the state has said approximately a 4-week time frame because they're giving us a little bit of a buffer zone. But again, and Jeff, jump in on.
No, Tom's right. Originally, there was really no guidance as far as what the turnaround time was for somebody staying in remote or moving back to hybrid or vice versa. Although we were told that hybrid could move to remote at any time. the 4 to 6 weeks transition time was something that finally came out of DESE probably mid-fall. And so now when people are making that request, we try to honor it as quickly as we can, but we have a 4 to 6 week buffer to try to make it work. And obviously that could create some havoc if situations arise where classrooms that were built to meet whatever standard we end up finalizing on to get the students in for full in-person, that could change dramatically. So we are, obviously we need to know where we are at right now, and we're hoping that when people do make that determination that it is for an extended period of time, just for the sake of keeping the classes in a fashion that allow us to meet the needs of that fully in-person return.
Okay, that's what I thought. So that hasn't still changed. So again, it's like the analogy I said about trying to plan a wedding when you don't know who's all coming and where they're sitting, and it can change. So, okay. Two other things. One, just a point that I wanted to make, and Mr. Miller, I had texted with you earlier about this, but there is a possibility when we do go fully back in person, depending on remote students that may flex back in. Although it is a few number of classrooms, there is still the possibility that children will be moved to a new teacher. And so I just wanted to make sure that that point was shared. We talked about it on our task force meeting. And I know as a mom and as a teacher, when we talk about social emotional learning for our kids, that would be a really hard transition for when I think of my own two girls. If I said, like, you're going back to school full time and you have a new teacher, like that would throw, like, I don't even want to think about it. So I do think it's important that we acknowledge that that would be a possibility that some of our families would have to potentially have to face and deal with. Do we make sure that there are adequate supports in place for those kids if and when that time happens? And then my last point, when you were talking about transportation and drop off, I'm a Martinson parent, so I can't speak to the other elementary schools. Mr. Dunn deserves like an award for running drop off and pickup, but it scares me a little to think about double the kids and the amount of cars that would be rolling out onto Forest Street for an extended amount of time. So did you guys have a chance to talk to the police department about maybe putting some enforcements in place for us in terms of pickup and drop off, especially at our schools that have large numbers of kids?
Yeah, we haven't specifically reached out to the police yet, but this is the great thing about having our new 2 resource officers. We would have the potential of having 3 officers at our 3 buildings. We have 3 buildings, early schools now, and then 2 later schools. There would be a potential to have an officer there to definitely help with traffic flow. That was a big discussion point because I think the initial thought was that pickup drop off could be way too much to handle right now with the number of parents that are providing transportation. I think we foresaw that in talking with the building principals that even with a 30-minute time frame, we do have parents getting there very early. Now, as you know, there's the fight to be first in line is a tremendous fight every day. So even if we had an 8:20, 8:50 at a early school, those 8:50 parents might be moving into the 8:20 time frame and such. So I think if we allow for earlier drop-offs, staff it appropriately, something along those lines would be much more manageable. It's going to be a lot of work. I would foresee if it's possible, and we work with the traffic safety officer and the police department, as we do, just about every year in these situations where we could potentially. I know South River has a 2 drop-off plan that they could do. Martinson, obviously, it's a little more difficult. In some schools, it's a little more difficult. So. But it's something we would work on and hand in hand with the Marshfield Police.
Thank you. That's all I had, Sean.
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell. My sincere apologies for calling you Kendra before when I recognized you. Would like to turn it on over
Really
now to
fine.
I'd like to turn it on over now to Mr. Greer.
Rich, you're muted. We can't hear you.
You're muted, Rich.
We can't hear you.
I could hear every word I was saying. Nobody else could, though. Anyway, so the task force that we put together, we did find solutions for everything, right? And that was our recommendations. Now, buried within that are a number of action items that need to be addressed. However, once those are addressed, then we can begin implementation on these solutions if the school committee so chooses to go in that direction. That's all I had to say.
Oh, Laura, you might be on mute as well. Oh, no, I just can't hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? Can you guys hear me? No. Some people are saying no. Okay, hold on.
One moment, folks. We're just making sure Ms. Brake can be heard.
Keeping our distance.
Okay, what about now? Yes, okay, sorry about that. Just real quick, I want everyone to understand that just because we are making these recommendations doesn't mean it's going to happen. And we're doing this because we want to be prepared. Being unprepared is unacceptable. So we need to find solutions to these problems, and that was our job. As Rich kind of stated, sort of, that we tried to keep a lot of the other pieces out of it. Not that they're not going to be considered or will be considered, but us coming up with the solutions, that wasn't necessarily the time to throw in all that extra stuff. But I do want to assure everyone that the safety of our students and staff is of utmost importance, and we will continue to support you in every way that we can, including when we return back to school. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brake. Much appreciated. Going to go ahead and turn it on over now to you, Ms. Boyd.
Laura actually just addressed the only question I had, which was sort of just confirming that, you know, this was an exercise to prepare us and to take a look at the feasibility and how would we return all students to school safely. And it was done sort of separate from consideration of the public health data. So thank you.
Mr. Greer, you had something to add to that?
Yeah, essentially the process that we use stripped out emotion and opinion, right? So, you know, what we're using is the DESE guidelines. So those are our constraints, right? We don't add in artificial constraints, which is emotion and opinion. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I disagree that public health data is emotion, but I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Ms. Boyd. Any other questions, comments from members of the committee? Mr. Granatino, Mr. Miller, anything to add before we move on? Do you have anything to add before we move on?
As with the teaching and learning group, I want to thank the facilities group for doing their work. I mean, they had a clear task. They were trying to see what would make it doable, what would make it feasible to bring our students back. And I think we all want to get there. And I think the approach, the elementary to Furnace-Burke to high school approach is the best trajectory to take. We just have to determine what time frame that's going to be. And again, there's some questions that still need to be addressed at each level, obviously. And as we continue to look at this, this is not just presenting tonight and then letting it sit for a while. This is going to be an ongoing process, and I'm sure we'll be back talking about it at the next meeting because we'll have more answers from some of the questions that have come up tonight. And eventually we'll be able to find ourselves with our students back in school, which is what I think we all want to have, but it just might take a little time to get there.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Granatino, Mr. Miller, both of you for your work on that subcommittee. And, just want to reiterate that I agree wholeheartedly with what's been said before, is that the goal is to bring back students and staff as safely as possible, utilizing state guidelines and adhering to ensure that we're keeping our people safe and healthy. That's the goal in the midst of a global pandemic. So appreciate all of that work and look forward to seeing what the future brings with that and staying on top of that with all of you folks. So we have a couple other items here on the agenda and would like to applaud 78 of you who have stuck with us for 2 hours and 40 minutes. That is impressive. 77, somebody just dropped off as I said that. Was it you, Mr. Greer? So thank you, folks. We appreciate that. We do have 2 other items on the agenda, but I'd like to entertain, if the committee would be comfortable, since we are going to have a special meeting next week, moving these to next week. It's been a long night. We've had a lot of information thrown at us, and that's not just the 5 of us and everybody here, but it's also all of you who are watching. So that's a lot of information to take in. And Mr. Miller, no offense, I don't know if I could do a job.
Oh, can we do the driver's education fee just real quick? Mr. Howerton needs it.
Okay, if it's for Mr. Howard, absolutely.
Oh, wait till I sign my kids. I gotta sign Luke up first before we run.
So this, real quickly, this is an increase. I'm unmuted, right? Where is it? Oh, come on. Right here. It's an increase of $75 on the driver's education fee. It's simply to because of the increase in the contractual extra services rate from 33 an hour to 35 an hour. So there was a survey provided of South Shore, other driver's education providers, and we're still by far the lowest. And even at the $675 rate, we still would be by far the lowest. So Mr. Howerton needs to advertise, so that's why I'm jamming it in right here as the first read action.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any questions, comments from the committee on this? I know we all get this information days before the meeting. What's that, Mr. Greer?
Was it
what the fee would be?
Oh yeah, $675. So it's simple vote to approve driver education fee of $675.
Is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
So moved from Mr. Greer. Is there a second?
Quick question.
Second.
Quick question, Mr. Greer. Go ahead before
Yep.
we vote.
Is that effective immediately, or when is the effective date?
The effective date would be immediately. The class is going to start at the end of January, I believe.
Okay, so effective immediately. Okay.
Great,
So
thank you.
Second.
Yeah, motion's been made by Mr. Greer. I heard a second from Ms. Campbell. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Abstaining? 500. Thank you very much. Ms. Pazurski, if it's okay with you, we will do the meeting minutes at the next meeting as well. Folks, we will be announcing shortly what our next meeting will be. Thank you all to those of you who stuck with us here and to those of you watching on TV or on MCTV as well. We appreciate it. Any questions, always feel free to reach out to us. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. I'm your host, Sean Costello. Very much appreciated. Have a great night.